For more than a century, one small strip of land in the eastern Mediterranean has been at the center of one of the most complex and emotionally charged conflicts in modern history: the Arab-Israeli conflict, a struggle involving territory, identity, religion, nationalism, displacement, war, and diplomacy. A conflict that has shaped the Middle East, influenced global politics, and affected millions of lives. At its core are two national movements: Jewish Zionism, seeking a homeland for the Jewish people, and Arab-Palestinian nationalism, seeking self-determination in the land they have lived in for generations. Both claim historical and emotional ties to the same territory, and both have experienced profound suffering. Understanding this conflict requires stepping back, looking at history carefully, examining the facts, and listening to multiple perspectives. Because the story of the Arab-Israeli conflict did not begin in a single moment. It developed gradually through empires, migrations, wars, revolutions, and political decisions that continue to shape the region today. This is the history of that conflict. To understand the Arab-Israeli conflict, we must begin before the conflict itself existed. For centuries, the region known historically as Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. The population was diverse. Muslims formed the majority, alongside Christian communities and a small Jewish population that had lived in the region for generations. Cities like Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, and Jaffa were home to people from different religious traditions. For much of this period, identity was not defined primarily by nationalism. People identified by religion, local community, or imperial loyalty, rather than modern nation-states. But by the late 19th century, powerful new ideas were spreading across Europe and the Middle East: nationalism. Across Europe, ethnic and national groups were seeking their own states. Among Jews in Europe, this movement produced Zionism. Zionism was the belief that the Jewish people, who had faced centuries of persecution and discrimination in Europe, needed a homeland where they could exercise political self-determination. Many Zionists believed that homeland should be in the historic land of Israel. At the same time, Arab nationalism was also emerging across the Middle East. Arab intellectuals and political leaders increasingly sought independence from Ottoman rule and later European control. These two national movements, Jewish Zionism and Arab nationalism, would eventually intersect in the same territory, and that intersection would change the region forever. The modern Zionist movement formally emerged in the late 19th century. One of its key figures was Theodor Herzl, an Austro-Hungarian journalist who argued that Jews needed a sovereign state to escape anti-Semitism in Europe. In 1897, Herzl organized the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland. There, Zionist leaders declared their goal: the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. At the time, Palestine was still part of the Ottoman Empire. Beginning in the late 1800s and early 1900s, waves of Jewish immigrants began moving to the region. These migrations are known as the Aliyot, meaning ascents in Hebrew. Many of these immigrants were fleeing persecution, pogroms, and economic hardship in Eastern Europe and Russia. They began establishing agricultural settlements and communities. Some purchased land from absentee landlords. Others founded collective farming communities known as kibbutzim. These developments gradually changed the demographic landscape. While Jews were still a minority in the early decades of the 20th century, their population began growing steadily. Many Arab residents grew increasingly concerned about the political implications of this immigration. They feared losing land, influence, and ultimately control of the territory. Tensions between communities slowly increased, but the most dramatic turning point was yet to come. World War I reshaped the political map of the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire collapsed after centuries of rule. In the aftermath, European powers, particularly Britain and France, took control of large parts of the region. Britain was given administrative control over Palestine through a system known as the British Mandate. But Britain had already made several promises during the war that complicated the future of the region. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration. This statement expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. At the same time, Britain had also made commitments to Arab leaders who were seeking independence from Ottoman rule. These overlapping promises created deep political contradictions. Jewish immigration increased under British rule. At the same time, Arab Palestinians demanded independence and majority political control. Violence between communities began to rise. Riots broke out in the 1920s and 1930s. Both sides organized militias. Jewish defense organizations such as Haganah were formed. Arab uprisings also took place. One of the most significant was the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, a large-scale uprising against British rule and increased Jewish immigration. Britain struggled to control the escalating conflict, and the situation became even more complicated with events unfolding in Europe. The outbreak of World War II profoundly affected the future of Palestine. During the war, Nazi Germany carried out the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews across Europe. The scale of the genocide shocked the world. After the war, many Jewish survivors were displaced, homeless, and unable to return to their former communities. For many, the idea of a Jewish homeland became even more urgent. Zionist organizations increased pressure on Britain to allow more Jewish immigration to Palestine. But Britain, concerned about Arab opposition and regional stability, restricted immigration. Tensions escalated further. Jewish underground groups began attacking British installations. Britain increasingly found the situation unmanageable. In 1947, Britain referred the problem to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a solution, but that solution would lead directly to war. In November 1947, the United Nations proposed dividing Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jerusalem would be placed under international administration due to its religious significance. The plan attempted to accommodate both national movements. At the time, Jews made up roughly 1/3 of the population, but were allocated about 55% of the land. Arab leaders rejected the proposal, arguing it unfairly favored the Jewish minority and violated the rights of the Arab majority. Zionist leaders accepted the plan, seeing it as a path towards statehood. Violence between communities erupted almost immediately. Civil war broke out between Jewish and Arab forces in Palestine, and within months the conflict would expand into a regional war. On May 14, 1948, Jewish leaders declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The following day, neighboring Arab states, including Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, sent military forces into the territory. The first Arab-Israeli war had begun. The war lasted nearly a year. Israeli forces ultimately gained the upper hand and expanded their control beyond the borders originally proposed in the UN partition plan. By the end of the conflict in 1949, Israel controlled roughly 78% of the former Mandate territory. Jordan controlled the West Bank. Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. But the war also produced a major humanitarian crisis. Approximately 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes during the conflict. Many became refugees in neighboring countries and territories. Palestinians referred to this event as the Nakba, meaning catastrophe. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of Jews living in Arab countries later migrated or fled to Israel over the following decades. Both communities experienced displacement and trauma, and the war left deep wounds that remain central to the conflict today. Nearly 2 decades later, tensions in the region erupted again. In June 1967, Israel fought a war against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. The conflict lasted only 6 days, but its consequences were enormous. Israel captured several territories: the West Bank from Jordan, the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Israel also gained control of East Jerusalem, including the Old City. These territories became central to the future of the conflict. The international community generally considers them occupied territories. Israel views them as strategically important and historically significant. The war also led to another wave of Palestinian displacement, and it transformed the political landscape of the Middle East. In the decades following 1967, Palestinian political identity and organization grew stronger. One of the key organizations was the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. Founded in 1964, the PLO initially sought to liberate Palestine through armed struggle. Under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, the organization became the main representative of the Palestinian national movement. Over time, the PLO shifted toward diplomacy. By the late 1980s, it formally recognized Israel and supported the idea of a two-state solution. Meanwhile, Palestinian life under Israeli control in the West Bank and Gaza remained tense. This tension eventually erupted into widespread protests and uprisings. In 1987, a mass Palestinian uprising began. It became known as the First Intifada. The movement involved protests, strikes, and civil disobedience against Israeli occupation. Images of stone-throwing youths confronting Israeli soldiers captured global attention. The uprising lasted several years. It eventually led to diplomatic negotiations, but tensions remained high. In 2000, a second uprising known as the Second Intifada broke out. This phase of the conflict was far more violent. It involved suicide bombings, military operations, and significant civilian casualties on both sides. The violence deepened mistrust and made peace negotiations increasingly difficult. Despite the violence, there have been repeated attempts to achieve peace. One of the most significant was the Oslo Accords in the 1990s. These agreements created the Palestinian Authority and allowed limited Palestinian self-governance in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. The long-term goal was a negotiated two-state solution, but key issues remained unresolved. These include borders, security arrangements, the status of Jerusalem, Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and the fate of Palestinian refugees. Over the years, multiple rounds of negotiations have attempted to address these issues, but no final agreement has yet been reached. Today, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the most enduring disputes in modern international politics. Israel is a sovereign state with a powerful economy and military. Palestinians remain divided between the West Bank, governed in part by the Palestinian Authority, and Gaza, controlled by the group Hamas since 2007. Violence periodically escalates between Israel and armed groups in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israeli settlements continue to expand in parts of the West Bank, a policy widely criticized internationally. Humanitarian concerns, security fears, and political divisions persist on both sides, and the broader Arab-Israeli conflict has evolved. Several Arab states have signed peace agreements with Israel, but the Palestinian question remains unresolved. The Arab-Israeli conflict is often described in simple terms, but its reality is far more complex. It is a conflict shaped by history, trauma, identity, religion, and geopolitics. Both Israelis and Palestinians see their narratives as rooted in justice, survival, and national identity. Both have experienced loss and suffering, and both continue to seek security, dignity, and a future for their people. Understanding the conflict does not require choosing a side. It requires understanding the history, because only by examining the past carefully can we begin to understand why peace remains so difficult and why so many people continue to hope that one day it may still be possible.